My family believed my silver briefcase contained rejected resumes, not the only access point to the system guarding 60% of the American power grid. On Christmas Eve, Mom handed me $200 for gas and suggested a cashier job. Behind her, Anderson Cooper appeared on the 80-inch screen, trembling as he revealed the identity of Silicon Valley's most powerful woman. The face on the news was mine, currently sitting at the table chewing dry turkey. My name is Liana Amberton, and as I steered the beige rental Ford sedan into the driveway of my parents' home, I could practically feel my net worth dropping simply by association with the vehicle. The car smelled faintly of stale French fries and industrial air freshener, a sensory combination that perfectly matched the role I was about to play. My security team had insisted on the rental. They called it low-profile asset transport. I called it a method acting exercise I had not signed up for. The house loomed ahead, a sprawling brick monument to upper-middle-class insecurity in the heart of the Chicago suburbs. It was the kind of house that screamed stability. With manicured hedges cut into geometric shapes so precise, they looked like they had been rendered by a graphics card, and a front lawn that was more chemical than grass. Every window was ablaze with warm, golden light, and the roof was lined with tasteful white icicle lights that probably cost more to install than my first apartment's rent. It was a picture-perfect Christmas card setting, the kind that usually hid a significant amount of debt and even more repressed resentment. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. I looked tired, which was accurate, but not for the reasons my family would assume. They would see the dark circles under my eyes and assume I was staying up late worrying about rent or refreshing job boards. In reality, I had spent the last 72 hours in a secure, lead-lined command center in Nevada, overseeing the migration of the National Air Traffic Control database to a quantum-resistant server architecture. I had slept for 4 hours on a cot that cost $3,000, but right now, I just looked like a woman who could not afford a decent concealer. I took a breath, grabbed my silver briefcase from the passenger seat, and stepped out into the biting December wind. The briefcase was handcuffed to my wrist inside my sleeve, a subtle biometric lock securing it. To my family, it was just an affectation, a prop I carried to look busy. To the Department of Defense, it was a mobile nuclear football for the digital age. The front door swung open before I even reached the porch steps. My mother, Patricia, stood framed in the doorway, wiping her hands on a festive apron embroidered with a jolly Santa Claus. The smell of roasting turkey and cinnamon pine cones rushed out to meet me, instantly transporting me back to being 16 years old and grounded for hacking the school district's attendance records. "Liana, you made it," she said, her smile tight. She stepped out onto the porch, hugging her arms against the cold, and immediately let her eyes travel the length of my body. It was a scan more invasive than the ones at the TSA checkpoint. Her gaze lingered on my sweater. It was a charcoal cashmere turtleneck from a boutique in Milan that did not have a website and required an appointment just to enter. It cost $4,000 and felt like wearing a cloud. My mother, however, pinched the fabric near my shoulder as she pulled me into a stiff hug. "Oh, honey," she whispered, her voice dripping with that specific brand of maternal pity that cuts deeper than any insult. "I think I have some old sweaters in the attic if you are cold. This one looks a bit thin. You know, Aunt Brenda is here. We do not want you looking like you are struggling. Even if things are tight, I am warm enough." "Mom," I said, forcing a smile that felt like it might crack my face, "it is good to see you." She ushered me inside, practically pushing me toward the warmth of the foyer. The house was suffocatingly hot. The thermostat cranked up to 75 degrees to combat the Illinois winter. Inside, the visual assault of Christmas was absolute. There were garlands wrapped around the banister, nutcrackers standing sentinel on the mantel, and a 12-foot Douglas fir tree dominating the living room. Drowning in so much tinsel, it looked like a disco ball had exploded. And there, sitting on the plush leather sofas, like monarchs holding court, were Aunt Brenda and Uncle Tom. Aunt Brenda was my mother's older sister and her primary rival in the sport of vicarious achievement. She held a glass of white wine in one hand and a cracker topped with brie in the other, looking like she was ready to critique an Olympic performance. Uncle Tom sat beside her, scrolling through his phone with the detached boredom of a man who had tuned out his wife's voice 30 years ago. Brenda cried out, not getting up. "We were just talking about you. Look at you. You look so natural. No makeup? That is brave." "Hello, Aunt Brenda? Uncle Tom?" I said, unhooking my coat and hanging it in the closet. I kept the briefcase in my hand. I prefer to keep things simple these days. "Simple is good," Brenda said, nodding sagely as if I had admitted to a terminal illness. "Simple saves money. We heard you are still driving that rental car. Tom was just saying how smart that is. No maintenance costs, right? Although, at your age, most people prefer to own equity. You know, I walked into the living room, the carpet thick enough to swallow my ankles. I am just visiting, so a rental made sense. My father, Robert, emerged from the kitchen carrying a bottle of red wine. He was a good man, in the way that people who follow every rule and never question authority are good men. He had worked for the same insurance firm for 40 years, retired with a gold watch, and believed that the world operated exactly as it had in 1995. He looked at me with a mixture of love and weary disappointment. "There she is," Dad said, pouring wine into a glass that was already waiting on the coaster for me. "The prodigal daughter returns. How was the drive? That old Ford treat you okay?" "The car was fine." "Dad," I said, taking the wine. I did not drink, usually. Alcohol slowed down synaptic response times, and in my line of work, a millisecond delay could mean a city block losing power. But tonight, I took a sip. I needed the sedative. "So," Dad continued, settling into his recliner and gesturing for me to sit on the ottoman, the lowest seat in the room. "How is the project going?" "What is it called again? The blog?" "It is not a blog, Dad," I said, keeping my voice level. "It is a consultancy." Right. Consultancy," he said, using air quotes that made my teeth ache. "Brenda was telling us that her son, your cousin Mark, just made senior manager at Deloitte. 30 years old, and he has a corner office and a dedicated parking spot. That is a career. Liana, that is something you can build a life on. That sounds great for Mark." I said, "We just worry." "Liana," Mom chimed in, bringing a tray of stuffed mushrooms from the kitchen. She set them down on the coffee table with a clatter. "You are 28. You have a degree from MIT. We know you are smart, but this, floating around, working from your laptop in coffee shops, it is not sustainable. I do not work in coffee shops." "Mom." "Well, wherever you work," Dad interrupted, leaning forward, "is it making money? Real money?" "Not just enough to pay for whatever this outfit is." I set my wine glass down. The condensation left a ring on the coaster. "I am doing fine. Dad, actually, we just closed a major contract. I have been hunting for vulnerabilities in critical infrastructure systems." The room went silent. Uncle Tom looked up from his phone. Aunt Brenda narrowed her eyes. My parents exchanged a look of pure horror. Hunting Mom repeated, her voice trembling slightly, "You are hunting for vulnerabilities." I repeated, realizing too late how that sounded to people whose understanding of technology ended at resetting the Wi-Fi router. "Oh, honey," Mom sighed, her shoulders slumping. "You mean, you are job hunting. You are looking for openings, vulnerabilities in the job market." "Mom, I mean, it is okay to say it." "Liana," Dad said, holding up a hand to stop me. He looked pained. "You are looking for work. You are hunting for a job. That is what you meant. There is no need to dress it up with fancy words. We appreciate you trying to make it sound technical, but we know what hunting means. It means you are unemployed." I opened my mouth to correct him, to explain that a 0-day vulnerability in a SCADA system was worth $500,000 on the black market and that I had just patched 3 of them before breakfast. But I looked at their faces. They were comfortable in their pity. They understood unemployment. They did not understand cyber warfare. Explaining the truth would sound like science fiction, or worse, a lie. "Sure, Dad," I said, letting the words taste like ash in my mouth. "I am hunting." A heavy sigh of relief circulated the room. They preferred a failure they understood to a success they could not comprehend. "See," Brenda said, triumphantly reaching into her oversized handbag. "I told you. Patricia. She just needs guidance." "Liana, sweetie, I brought you something. I was going to wait for presents, but I think you need this now." She pulled out a paperback book with a bright yellow cover. She slid it across the coffee table toward me. The title was printed in bold. Cheerful Letters, The Resume Repair Kit, How to Land Your Dream Entry-Level Job. I stared at the book. The corner of the cover was slightly bent, as if it had been sitting in a bargain bin. "Mark used this when he was an intern." Brenda said, beaming. "Well, he did not really use it. He was naturally gifted at networking. But I thought of you immediately when I saw it at the Goodwill. It has templates." "Liana, templates are very helpful when you do not have much experience to list." "Thank you." "Aunt Brenda," I said. My hand twitched. I wanted to tell her that my resume was currently in a classified folder on the president's desk, and it consisted of a single sheet of paper that simply listed my clearance level and the number of national crises I had averted. "Just read the chapter on dressing for success," Brenda added, gesturing vaguely at my cashmere sweater. "It says that first impressions are everything. You want to look professional, not like you just rolled out of bed." My pocket vibrated. It was a specific haptic pattern, 3 short pulses, 1 long. My heart rate spiked instantly. That was the alert for a level 5 intrusion. I pulled my phone out. It was a custom-modified device with no brand markings. On the screen, a seemingly innocuous push notification from a weather app appeared: Storm Warning Severity 5. Vortex access required. My fingers hovered over the screen. A level 5 meant a state actor was actively attempting to breach the perimeter. Someone was trying to take down a grid. It could be New York. It could be the Eastern Seaboard. I needed to open the laptop. I needed to authenticate. I needed to stop it. "Liana," Mom said sharply, "no phones at the table. We are having family time." I looked at the phone, then I looked at the briefcase by my feet. If I opened it now, the biometric scanners would light up, the holographic interface would project, the room would turn into a command center. They would think I was playing a video game. "It is important," I said. "More important than your family dad asked. More important than listening to the advice your aunt is kind enough to give you." I stared at the notification. The storm warning blinked once, then faded. My second in command, a 20-year-old prodigy in Seoul, would have to handle the initial containment. I could not blow my cover over a probe. If they breached the second firewall, I would intervene. I slid the phone back into my pocket. "No, not more important." "Sorry." "Good," Dad said. "Now, let's go to the dining room. Your mother has been cooking all day." We moved to the dining room, a space dominated by a mahogany table that was only used twice a year. The china was the good set, the ones with the gold rims that we were not allowed to touch as children. I sat at my assigned spot, the same chair I had sat in since I was 5. As everyone settled in, shaking out their napkins and admiring the centerpiece, my mother leaned in close to me. She smelled of hairspray and desperation. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a white envelope. It was thick. She slid it under the table, pressing it against my thigh. But then, perhaps overcome by the urge to perform her benevolence for an audience, she changed her mind. She placed the envelope directly on my placemat, right next to the crystal water glass. "I do not want you to worry about money this Christmas," she said. Her voice was a stage whisper, calibrated perfectly to reach Aunt Brenda's ears at the other end of the table. "Mom." "No," I said, instinctively trying to push it back. "Take it," she insisted, pushing it back toward me with a force that crinkled the paper. "Your father and I discussed it. There is $500 in there." The table went quiet. $500. That was the hourly rate I charged just to read an email. That was the cost of the wine we had drunk at the company celebration last week. Patricia, that is very generous. Aunt Brenda cooed. Liana, you should be very grateful. I am, I said, feeling the heat rise in my cheeks. It was not embarrassment for myself. It was a burning, secondhand embarrassment for them, but I do not need shush. Mom cut me off, holding up a finger. We know you are proud, but pride does not buy groceries. And listen to me. Liana. She leaned in closer, her eyes wide and intense. I want you to take this money and go to the mall on Monday. There is a sale at Macy's. Buy yourself a nice suit. Something navy blue or black. Something that says, I am ready to work. She patted my hand, her rings clicking against the table. Do not let people judge our family because you look unfinished. I looked at the envelope. I looked at the $3,000 worth of Italian yarn covering my arms. I looked at the briefcase sitting under my chair, which contained a hard drive worth more than the GDP of a small island nation. Okay, Mom, I said softly, I will buy a suit. That is my girl, Dad said, raising his glass. To Liana, may the new year bring her a paycheck. To a paycheck, Uncle Tom echoed. I raised my glass. To a paycheck, I murmured. Inside my pocket, the phone vibrated again. 2 long pulses. The breach was contained. My team had handled it. The world was safe for another hour, protected by the unemployed girl in the unfinished sweater. Now, who wants dark meat, Dad asked, carving the turkey with a dull electric knife. I watched the blade saw back and forth, tearing the meat rather than slicing it. It was going to be a very long night. The tranquility of my degradation was interrupted by the distinct, aggressive roar of a turbocharged engine cutting through the suburban silence. It was not just a car arrival, it was an announcement. Beams of xenon light swept across the living room window, momentarily blinding us, followed by the heavy thud of a car door that sounded like a bank vault closing. Kevin had arrived. My older brother did not simply enter a room. He annexed it. The front door flew open, letting in a gust of freezing wind and the overwhelming scent of expensive cologne that smelled of cedarwood and unearned confidence. He walked in, shaking snow from a cashmere coat that cost more than the average American mortgage payment, followed closely by his wife, Monica. Kevin was 32, 6 feet tall, and maintained the kind of physique that required a personal trainer and a diet consisting entirely of kale and rage. He was the vice president of mergers and acquisitions at a mid-sized investment bank in New York, a title he repeated so often I sometimes wondered if he had it tattooed on his chest. Hey folks, the eagle has landed, Kevin boomed, dropping a stack of wrapped gifts onto the entryway table with a heavy thud. He strode into the living room, bypassing me completely to embrace Mom. You look great. Mom, younger every year. Dad, looking sharp. Kevin. My boy Dad stood up, his face lighting up with a genuine pride that had been entirely absent 10 minutes ago. We saw the Porsche in the driveway. Is that the new one, the Cayenne Turbo GT? Kevin said, feigning nonchalance while ensuring his Rolex Daytona flashed under the chandelier light. 0 to 60 in 3 seconds. I needed an upgrade. The old one was feeling a bit sluggish on the commute to Wall Street. He finally turned his gaze toward me. It was the look a lion might give a mouse not hungry, just amused by its insignificance. And look who decided to grace us with her presence, Kevin said, flashing a smile that did not reach his eyes. Liana. Still driving that rental, I saw a beige Sadness Mobile parked behind my car. I almost had it towed because I thought it was abandoned. Hello? Kevin, I said, remaining seated. It gets me from point A to point B. Monica stepped forward then. She was a woman who treated life like a curated Instagram feed. Her hair was a perfect blonde bob. Her makeup was severe, and she wore a white coat that looked terrified of encountering a single speck of dust. Hi, Liana, Monica said, offering me a cheek to kiss, but not actually making contact. We were not sure you would make it. Kevin said gas prices are up again. We were worried about your budget, I managed. They settled onto the love seat, displacing Aunt Brenda, who looked delighted to be demoted in the presence of such palpable success. The energy in the room shifted instantly. The air, previously thick with pity for me, was now electric with adoration for them. "So, Kevin," Uncle Tom asked, leaning forward eagerly, "how was the quarter? The market has been looking shaky. Shaky for the sheep." "Tom, shaky for the sheep," Kevin said, winking. "For wolves. It is a buffet. We just closed the fiscal year. Let's just say my year-end bonus has 2 commas in it." "2 commas?" Mom gasped, clutching her pearls. "Oh, Kevin, that is wonderful." "It is all right," Kevin shrugged, accepting a glass of wine from Dad. "We are celebrating by booking a chalet in Zermatt for February, skiing in the Swiss Alps. You know, just to clear the head. The air in New York gets so stale with all the desperation." "Switzerland," Aunt Brenda sighed. "That is the dream." "It is important to recharge," Monica added, smoothing her skirt. "Kevin works so hard. He carries the weight of the entire department." I took a sip of water to wash down the bile rising in my throat. I knew Kevin's bank. I knew their cybersecurity infrastructure because I had personally red-teamed it 6 months ago as a favor to a friend at the SEC. Their firewall was Swiss cheese, and Kevin's password was likely still password 123. But here, in this living room, he was a titan of industry. Kevin's eyes drifted to the floor by my feet. He spotted the silver briefcase. He let out a short, barking laugh. "Oh, wow. You are still carrying that thing," Kevin gestured with his wine glass, sloshing a little red liquid dangerously close to the carpet. "The silver football. What is inside that today?" "Liana. Your manifesto. Or is that where you keep the rejection letters so they do not get wet?" "It is my work computer." "Kevin," I said calmly. He shook his head, looking at the rest of the family with a grin. "It is huge. Look at the thickness of that chassis. It looks like something from the 90s. Liana, you know they make MacBook Airs now, right? They are thin, light. That thing looks like a brick." It was, in fact, a brick. A very specific brick. The chassis was reinforced titanium alloy, designed to withstand an electromagnetic pulse or a direct impact from a small-caliber round. It was air-gapped, shielded, and contained a direct uplink to the Vortex defense grid. It cost $50,000 just to manufacture the casing. "It handles the processing power I need," I said. "Processing what Word documents?" Kevin laughed at his own joke. "Look, hearing that reminds me, I actually wanted to talk to you. I have a proposition." I stiffened. I was not sure I could handle a proposition from Kevin without laughing or screaming. "What is it?" "We had a girl in data entry quit last week. Just walked out." "Millennials, right?" "No work ethic," Kevin rolled his eyes, ignoring the fact that he was technically a millennial. "Anyway, we need someone to backfill the position. It is mostly inputting spreadsheets, verifying client addresses, mindless stuff, but I could pull some strings, get you an interview for data entry." I repeated, "It pays $15 an hour." Kevin said benevolently, "And listen, I know you are overqualified on paper with the MIT thing, but let's be honest. Liana, that gap in your resume is getting wider by the day. You need a win. You need a reference. If you do a good job for 6 months, maybe we can move you up to receptionist." The room held its breath. My mother looked at me with wide, hopeful eyes. My father looked ready to cry with gratitude. They saw this as a lifeline, the prodigal son saving the drowning daughter. "That is very kind of you, Kevin," I said, keeping my voice steady, ensuring the sarcasm was detectable only by a spectral analyzer. "But I cannot take a full-time position right now. I am fully committed to my current role." "Your current role," Kevin scoffed. "Doing what? Managing my organization." I said. There was a beat of silence. Then, Kevin snorted. Aunt Brenda giggled. Even Dad cracked a smile. "Organization," Kevin repeated, chuckling. "Liana, you and a laptop are not an organization. That is called a hobby. An organization has employees. It has revenue. It has an office that is not a bedroom. I have employees. I said tightly. Freelancers on Fiverr do not count. Liana. Kevin dismissed me with a wave of his hand. I felt a sharp pain in my hand and realized I was gripping the stem of my water glass hard enough to shatter it. I forced my fingers to relax. My organization currently had 2,000 elite personnel across 3 continents. My office was a decentralized network of secure nodes. My revenue was classified, but if I decided to liquidate my personal assets, I could buy Kevin's bank, fire him, and turn the building into a shelter for stray cats by Tuesday morning. But I said nothing. I could not. The non-disclosure agreements I had signed were thicker than the Bible. Monica leaned forward, sensing blood in the water. She decided to pivot the attack vector from professional to personal. You know, Liana, she said, her voice dripping with faux concern. It is not just about the money, it is about stability. Men look for that. Excuse me, I asked. I'm just saying. Monica continued, tilting her head. You are almost 30. You are still single. And I hate to say it, but high-value men, they want a partner who brings something to the table. They do not want a project. They do not want someone they have to support. She looked at me with pity. Maybe that is why you have not found anyone serious yet. You give off this chaotic energy, like you are still figuring out who you are. A memory flashed through my mind, sharp and vivid. 3 weeks ago, a terrace in Monaco overlooking the Mediterranean. Prince Alexander holding my hand, his knuckles white. The ring in the velvet box was a 4-carat sapphire that had belonged to his grandmother. Marry me, Liana, he had said. We can make it work. I don't care about the protocol. I had said no. Not because I didn't love him, but because being a princess meant press. It meant paparazzi. It meant I could no longer be the shadow, the ghost, the architect. It meant giving up the work that kept the world spinning. I had chosen the mission over the man. I had walked away from a throne to protect the grid. Chaotic energy, I repeated, looking Monica dead in the eye. Is that what you think I'm just trying to help? Monica said defensively. I have a friend, a divorced actuary. He is 45, but he has a townhouse. I could set you up. He does not mind. Fixer-uppers. Before I could respond, a shrill, electronic ringtone cut through the air. It was the default iPhone ringtone, loud and jarring. Kevin jumped. Fishing his phone out of his suit pocket, he looked at the screen and frowned. Ugh, office, he muttered. Sorry, folks, important business. Money never sleeps. He swiped the screen to answer, but in his haste, or perhaps due to the grease from the appetizers, he hit the speakerphone button. What? Kevin barked into the phone. I am at Christmas dinner. This better be good. Kevin, a frantic voice crackled through the speaker. It was a young man, sounding like he was hyperventilating. Sir, the dashboard is gone. What do you mean? Gone, Kevin snapped. It is red. Sir, everything is red. The trading platform, the client portal, the internal email. We just lost connection to the primary server in New Jersey. The screens just went black and then came back with a skull logo. Kevin's face turned a shade of crimson that matched his wine. I do not care about a skull logo. Reboot it. Call the vendor. Why are you calling me? I am not IT. We cannot call the vendor. Sir? The voice squeaked. The phones are down too. I am calling from my personal cell. Sir, the risk algorithm is offline. If the Asian markets open in 2 hours and we are blind, we could lose $50 million in the first 10 minutes. Fix it, Kevin screamed, spit flying from his mouth. I pay you people to keep the lights on. You are useless. Do you hear me? Useless. If that system is not up in 10 minutes, do not bother coming in tomorrow. He hung up the phone with a violent stab of his finger and threw it onto the sofa cushion. Unbelievable, Kevin huffed, adjusting his tie. Incompetence? Absolute incompetence. You hire these IT guys, you give them benefits, and the moment a wire gets loose, they panic. He looked at me, seeking validation for his outrage. See, Liana. This is the real world. stress, responsibility. Leading a team when everything is on fire. You are lucky you do not have to deal with this kind of pressure in your little world. I looked at Kevin. I looked at his phone, which was currently sitting on the cushion, silently receiving push notifications that he was too angry to check. The skull logo. I knew that logo. It belonged to a hacker collective known as Obsidian. They were messy, loud, and sloppy. They usually used a brute force DDoS attack to mask a deeper injection of ransomware. It was a level 3 threat. Annoying, but standard. My team, the team I ran from my little world, had likely already identified the signature. In fact, if I opened my briefcase, I could probably patch Kevin's bank's vulnerability in roughly 45 seconds. I could save his $50 million before the appetizers were finished. I looked at his face, arrogant, red, and sneering at me. That sounds very stressful. Kevin, I said quietly, I hope your IT team figures it out. They better, Kevin grumbled, picking up a stuffed mushroom, or I'm firing the lot of them. The irony was so thick I could almost taste it. He was threatening to fire the only people who could save him, while mocking the only person in the room who could command the people who could save him. I sat back, crossing my hands over my lap. The phone in my pocket buzzed again. A single short pulse. Status update. I ignored it. The bank could wait. I wanted to see how long Kevin could keep up the act before the reality of a global cyber siege crashed his ski trip to Switzerland. Monica patted Kevin's arm. Do not worry, honey. It is probably just a glitch. You know how computers are. Yes, I thought, I know exactly how computers are. And I knew exactly what was coming next. The dining room table was a battlefield of porcelain and passive aggression. We had moved from the appetizers to the main course, a transition marked by the grand entrance of the turkey, which my mother placed in the center of the table with the reverence usually reserved for religious artifacts. The bird was golden brown, glistening with glaze, and sat surrounded by a moat of roasted root vegetables. It looked perfect. It was also, as I knew from 28 years of experience, dry enough to require a gallon of water to swallow. We took our seats. Dad sat at the head of the table, carving knife in hand, looking out over his domain. To his right, Kevin and Monica sat like the crown prince and princess, their wine glasses already refilled. To his left, Mom fluttered about, fixing napkins and adjusting the centerpiece, and there was I, at the far end, next to Aunt Brenda, who was currently eyeing my plate to see how many carbohydrates I would dare to consume. Before we eat, Dad announced, tapping his knife against his crystal goblet. The sharp ding silenced the room. I just want to say a few words. He cleared his throat, his gaze drifting affectionately over Kevin before landing, with the weight of a lead anchor, on me. Christmas is a time for reflection, Dad began, his voice taking on that lecture hall quality I knew so well. It is a time to look at where we are and where we are going. It is about family, yes, but it is also about responsibility. He paused for effect. I stared at a roasted carrot, wishing I could dissolve into the floorboards. Responsibility, Dad repeated, savoring the word. It is what separates adults from children. Look at Kevin. He has taken on the mantle of leadership. He provides. He builds. He has found stability. He smiled at Kevin, who nodded with mock humility, swirling his Cabernet. And we want that for everyone at this table, Dad continued, his eyes locking onto mine. Liana, we know you are exploring. You are finding yourself, and that is fine for a season. But seasons change. Winter comes, and when winter comes, you need a roof. You need a foundation. You cannot build a life on sand. You need a career that exists in the real world, not in the clouds. I gripped my fork. The metal dug into my palm, a grounding sensation. I have a career. Dad, I said, my voice quiet but firm. I have a foundation. Dad sighed, a sound of infinite patience wearing thin. Liana, please, we are not attacking you. We are encouraging you. We just want you to understand that there is no shame in starting over. There is no shame in admitting that the What did you call it? The vulnerability hunting. That it did not work out. It is working out fine. I said, I work with complex security systems. I manage risk for high-value clients. Mom stopped spooning mashed potatoes onto my plate. She looked at me, her brow furrowed in genuine confusion. Security systems, she asked. You mean, like a DT, like home alarms? No, Mom, not home alarms, network infrastructure. Oh, her face brightened with a sudden, terrible understanding. I get it. You are working security, like a night guard. Watching the monitors. I froze. A piece of dry turkey seemed to lodge itself in my throat. No, Mom, I choked out. Not a guard. It is okay. Honey, Mom said loudly, looking around the table for support. That is a very respectable job. It is honest work. Uncle Tom's brother worked night security at the warehouse for years. It is quiet. You can read your books. You can use your laptop. That explains why you are always on that computer. You are watching the cameras. Kevin laughed. It was a sharp, barking sound. Night watchman, Kevin said, grinning. That actually makes sense. That explains the hours. And the outfit. Very tactical. Do they give you a flashlight and a badge? Liana. I am not a security guard, I said, my voice rising slightly. I am an architect of defensive. But before I could finish, before I could explain the difference between watching a parking lot and watching the firewall of the Pentagon, the room was shattered by a sound that triggered a Pavlovian response in every American household. Da-da-da-dum, da-da-da-dum, the urgent, staccato rhythm of the CNN breaking news alert cut through the air. The 80-inch television mounted on the wall of the adjacent living room had been left on. Muted, displaying a loop of holiday parades, but now, the screen had shifted. The mute function had been overridden by the emergency broadcast system. Or perhaps Dad had sat on the remote. The volume spiked. The festive red and green graphics were gone. In their place was a stark, pulsating crimson banner that read, Global Cyber Emergency. We interrupt this program for a major developing story. The anchor's voice boomed, filling the dining room. Dad frowned, looking over his shoulder. Turn that down. Patricia. We are eating... Wait, Kevin said, holding up a hand. His eyes narrowed. Look at the ticker. I looked. I did not need to read the ticker to know what it said. I had written the code that was currently generating the headlines. Attempted cyber attack on Federal Reserve, thwarted. U.S. power grid secure. After massive incursion. The camera cut to a flustered correspondent standing in front of the Treasury building in Washington, D.C. It was snowing there, too. Reports are coming in of a massive, coordinated cyber offensive launched approximately 1 hour ago, the reporter said, speaking rapidly. Sources at the Department of Homeland Security confirmed that a foreign state actor attempted to breach the central transaction ledger of the Federal Reserve. This attack, had it succeeded, would have wiped out trillions of dollars in banking records and effectively frozen the global economy. Mom gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Oh my God, my retirement fund. Relax, Mom, Kevin said, though he looked a little pale. It is fear-mongering. The Fed has firewalls, the reporter continued. However, the attack was stopped, not by the government, but by a private contractor. We are receiving reports that the defense was orchestrated by an automated response system known as the Vortex, operated by the secretive tech firm. Aegis Prime Systems, Kevin scoffed, stabbing a potato with his fork. Aegis Prime sounds like a comic book. Never heard of them. Probably some hacker group trying to take credit for a system glitch. I took a sip of water. My pulse was steady. 60 beats per minute. Analysts are calling it the most sophisticated defensive maneuvering in the history of cyber warfare. The reporter went on. The speed of the response was measured in nanoseconds. The attackers were not just blocked. Their systems were counter-hacked and dismantled in real time. Counter-hacked. Uncle Tom muttered. Is that legal? It is when the president signs a clandestine directive authorizing it. I thought, but I kept chewing my turkey. We are now getting word. The anchor back in the studio said, his face grave yet excited. that we have exclusive information regarding the leadership of Aegis Prime. For years, this company has operated in the shadows, securing contracts with the NSA, the Pentagon, and major financial institutions, all while keeping its ownership completely anonymous. Kevin rolled his eyes. Here we go. The mystery billionaire. Probably some kid in his mom's basement in Russia, or in a dining room in Illinois. I thought. The screen shifted to a graphic. It showed a silhouette of a head, filled with scrolling binary code. The founder, known only by the handle The Architect, has been the subject of intense speculation, the anchor said. But tonight, in light of this historic event, sources close to the White House have leaked the identity of the individual who just saved the American economy. Kevin's phone rang. It was not a text. It was a call, and it was loud. He looked at the screen and his face went from pale to chalk white. "It is the managing director," Kevin whispered. "Why is he calling me on Christmas? Answer it," Monica hissed. "It might be about the bonus." Kevin swiped the screen with a trembling finger. He put it on the table. Speakerphone on, unable to hold it to his ear. "Sir," Kevin said, his voice cracking. "Merry Christmas." I shut up. "Kevin." The voice on the other end was not merry. It was hysterical. It was the sound of a man who had stared into the abyss and seen the abyss blink first. "Are you watching the news?" "Yes, sir. We are watching." Kevin stammered. "The Fed thing, the Fed thing, the Fed thing, you idiot. It was not just the Fed. It was us. It was everyone," the voice screamed. The attack targeted the SWIFT banking network. Our entire liquidity pool was exposed. We were 30 seconds away from being insolvent. 30 seconds from zero. "Kevin, do you understand zero?" Kevin looked at the phone, then at me, then back at the phone. "But we are okay. We are okay because of them," the director shouted. "Because of Aegis Prime. Their software patched our vulnerability before the malware could execute. I just got off the phone with the board. They want to know if we have a direct line to them. We need to thank them. We need to pay them whatever they want. Kevin, you are the tech liaison for the merger division. Do you know who runs Aegis Prime? Do you have a contact?" Kevin swallowed hard. "No, sir. I thought they were a myth. I thought it was just hype. A myth." "You are a vice president and you think the company protecting our billions is a myth. Find out who they are. Find out now." The line went dead. Kevin stared at the phone as if it had just bitten him. The table was silent. Even the chewing had stopped. The only sound was the TV. "And now," the anchor said, his voice dropping to a dramatic register, "we can confirm the identity of the digital architect." I placed my fork down on the edge of my plate. It made a soft clink against the china. I picked up my napkin and dabbed the corners of my mouth. The timing was impeccable. I had programmed the press release to drop exactly 5 minutes after the threat was neutralized. "It is me," I said. I said it softly, calmly. A simple statement of fact. But no one heard me. Their eyes were glued to the television screen. Their mouths were slightly open. They were mesmerized by the glowing blue graphics of the news cycle, waiting for the face of their savior, or their villain, to appear. Mom was clutching Dad's arm. "Who do you think it is?" she whispered. "Probably Elon Musk. It is always Elon Musk." "It is not Musk," Dad said, leaning forward. "It is probably military. Some general." I said, "It is me," I repeated, slightly louder this time. Still nothing. Kevin was frantically typing on his phone, likely Googling Aegis Prime contact number to save his job. Monica was staring at the TV with a glazed expression. Aunt Brenda was chewing a cracker, her eyes darting back and forth. They could not hear me because I did not exist in this context. To them, I was Liana the disappointment, Liana the night watchman, Liana who needed a resume repair kit. The idea that the voice on the TV and the girl at the table could be the same person was a cognitive dissonance so strong it rendered them deaf. The anchor took a breath. "Ladies and gentlemen, the founder of Aegis Prime, the woman responsible for the most advanced cybersecurity infrastructure in the world, is 28-year-old Liana Amberton." The name hung in the air. It hung there for a second. suspended in the silence of the room, mingling with the smell of cooling turkey and pine needles. Mom blinked. "What did he say?" she asked, turning her head slightly to the side. "Did he say, Liana?" "That is a common name," Aunt Brenda said quickly. "There are lots of Lianas. Amberton," the anchor clarified. "Liana Amberton." And then, the picture changed. It was no longer a silhouette. It was a photograph. It was a black and white portrait, taken by Annie Leibovitz for a Vanity Fair feature that I had killed before it could run, but which had clearly been leaked. In the photo, I was not wearing a frantic expression or a security guard uniform. I was wearing a black blazer, standing in front of a wall of servers, my arms crossed, looking directly into the lens with a gaze that could strip paint off a wall. It was a look of absolute, terrifying competence. The caption beneath the photo read, "Liana Amberton, CEO founder, Aegis Prime Systems." Mom dropped her fork. It hit the plate with a violence that cracked the china. Dad's glasses slid down his nose, and he didn't bother to push them back up. His mouth opened, closed, and opened again, like a fish gasping for air. Kevin stopped typing. He looked at the TV, then he looked at me. Then he looked at the TV again. His brain was trying to process the data, but the file was corrupted. Liana. Kevin whispered. I picked up my wine glass and took a slow sip. The wine was cheap, acidic, and warm, but in that moment, it tasted like nectar. I looked at Kevin. I looked at Mom. I looked at the stunned faces of the people who had spent the last hour dissecting my failures. "I did tell you I was hunting," I said, setting the glass down. The silence that followed was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of a vacuum. The breathless void immediately following an explosion. Before the shockwave hits, the TV continued to blare. Ms. Amberton, a former student of MIT who left the university at age 19, has built Aegis Prime into a defense contractor with an estimated valuation of $4.5 billion. $4.5 billion? Uncle Tom repeated. He sounded like he was having a stroke. Mom looked at me. Her eyes were wide, terrified, and searching. She looked at my unfinished sweater. She looked at the envelope with the $500 sitting next to my plate. "Liana," she squeaked. Is that you?" I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands over my stomach. "Yes, Mom," I said, "and I think I will pass on the night shift." The image on the screen was not just a photograph. It was a declaration of war against mediocrity. The black and white contrast cut through the festive, multicolored garishness of my parents' living room like a scalpel. In the photo, my chin was tilted slightly upward. My eyes narrowed with a predatory focus that my family had never seen, or perhaps had chosen to ignore. The lighting in the studio had carved out the angles of my face, making me look less like their daughter and more like a statue erected in a city square. The chyron beneath my face was unmoving, a solid red bar with bold white text, "Liana Amberton, CEO and founder, Aegis Prime Systems." The silence in the dining room was shattered by a wet, heavy thud. My mother, Patricia, had been holding a crystal bowl of cranberry sauce. It was her grandmother's bowl, filled with the gelatinous, dark red cylinder she served every year. Her fingers, which had gone slack, simply released it. The bowl hit the edge of her plate, tipped, and crashed onto the pristine white lace tablecloth. It did not shatter, but the sauce exploded. A dark, violent red stain spread rapidly across the white fabric, looking disturbingly like a crime scene. A lump of cranberry jelly slid wetly onto the table runner. Mom did not move to clean it up. She did not grab a napkin. She did not gasp. She simply stared at the television, her hands still raised in the air, grasping a bowl that was no longer there. Dad was frozen in a posture of suspended animation. His mouth was hanging open, not in a comical way, but in a way that suggested his jaw muscles had simply ceased to receive signals from his brain. His reading glasses, which usually perched precariously on the bridge of his nose, slowly began to slide. They tipped forward, millimeter by millimeter, until they fell off his face completely, landing with a soft clatter on his dinner plate, right next to an untouched heap of stuffing. He did not blink. On the screen, the anchor's voice shifted from urgent to biographical, a tone usually reserved for eulogies or coronations. The enigma of Silicon Valley has finally been solved, the reporter narrated, his voice swelling with the gravity of the moment. Liana Amberton, a former prodigy who famously dropped out of MIT at 19, has been operating in total secrecy for the past 9 years. While rumors of her involvement in high-level defense contracts have circulated in the dark web for years, no one knew the extent of her empire. "Dropped out," Dad whispered. The words escaped him like a wheeze. "We thought you flunked out. You told us you were taking a gap year to find yourself. I took a gap year to build a quantum encryption engine in a basement in Cambridge. Dad, I thought," but I remained silent. I kept my hands folded on the table, watching the broadcast. The reporter continued. Aegis Prime Systems is not just a company. It is the backbone of modern Western cybersecurity. From the power grid to the banking sector, Amberton's code is the invisible shield protecting the American way of life. Financial analysts estimate her personal net worth, based on current government contracts and private equity valuation, to be approximately $4.5 billion. The number hung in the air. $4.5 billion. It was a number too large to comprehend. It was abstract, to people who clipped coupons for detergent and worried about the rising cost of unleaded gas. $4 billion was not money. It was a theoretical concept, like the distance to Mars. Uncle Tom made a sound in the back of his throat, a strangled gurgle that sounded like he was choking on a wishbone. Aunt Brenda, however, found her voice. It was shrill, desperate, and laced with a frantic denial. "No," she said, shaking her head violently. Her earrings jingled. "That is impossible. It is a mistake. It is a prank. Look at the spelling. Maybe it is Liana with 2 N's, or maybe it is a different Amberton. The name is on the screen." "Brenda," Uncle Tom rasped. "Liana Amberton. How many are there?" "It is A." Brenda practically shouted, pointing a manicured finger at the TV. "You know how they do that stuff now. Deepfakes. Someone took a picture of Liana and put it on a rich person's body. Look at her." She gestured wildly at me. "Look at her sitting there. She is wearing a sweater that looks like it has been washed 100 times. She is driving a Ford Focus. Billionaires do not drive rental cars. Tom, they fly in helicopters. She is eating a dinner roll. Does she look like she runs the power grid? She cannot even toast bread without burning it." I looked at the roll in my hand. I placed it gently back on the bread plate, on the television. The image changed. The black and white portrait faded, replaced by shaky, handheld footage that looked like it had been filmed from a great distance with a telephoto lens. It showed a facility in the middle of the Nevada desert. It was a fortress. High fences topped with razor wire, guard towers, and a massive, sleek concrete structure that disappeared into the side of a mountain. There were black SUVs parked in a perimeter. "This is the headquarters of Aegis Prime, known as the Citadel," the reporter said, located 300 feet beneath the Nevada desert. "It is considered one of the most secure locations on Earth, and earlier today, following the thwarted attack on the Federal Reserve, President Stevens issued this statement." The screen cut to the press briefing room in the White House. The President of the United States stood at the podium. He looked tired, but relieved. "We owe a debt of gratitude today," the President said, looking directly into the camera, not to a government agency, but to a private citizen whose vigilance never wavers. Liana Amberton and her team at Aegis Prime have once again proven that they are the guardians of our digital frontier. Liana, if you are watching, the country thanks you. The President of the United States had just said my name. He had not said it with disappointment. He had not asked why I was not married. He had spoken my name with the same reverence he used for foreign dignitaries. Aunt Brenda's mouth snapped shut. The argument about deepfakes died in her throat. You could not fake the president. Not on CNN, not live. The room seemed to tilt. The reality of the situation was settling in like concrete hardening around their feet. I looked at Kevin. My brother was not looking at the TV anymore. He was looking at me. He was staring at me with a terrifying intensity, as if he was seeing me for the very first time. His eyes scanned my face, searching for the sister he knew, the one he mocked, the one he pitied. But he could not find her. His gaze dropped to my sweater. 10 minutes ago, he had called it a sadness blanket. Now, under the harsh light of the revelation, he seemed to notice the way the fabric draped. He noticed the lack of pilling. He noticed the sheen of the fibers. He worked in finance. He knew what money looked like when it wasn't screaming. He knew that true wealth didn't shout. It whispered, "Cashmere." I saw him mouth the word silently. "That is 4-ply cashmere." He looked at my wrist. The sleeve of my sweater had pulled back slightly when I reached for my water, revealing the biometric cuff of the briefcase. It was not a Fitbit. It was sleek, black metal, pulsating with a faint, rhythmic blue light that matched the graphics on the CNN broadcast. His eyes widened. The blood drained from his face so fast it looked like a magic trick. He looked at the briefcase sitting by my feet. The brick, the 90s laptop. He realized, with a dawning horror, that he had mocked a device that probably held the nuclear launch codes, or something equally catastrophic. "Kevin," Monica whispered, tugging on his sleeve. Her voice was trembling. "Kevin, the president just thanked her." Why did the president thank her? Kevin did not answer. He could not. He was hyperventilating. And then, the sound began. It started with my phone. The custom device in my pocket began to ring. It was not a ringtone. It was a klaxon, loud, authoritative, and demanding. But it was not just my phone, Kevin's phone, which was still on the table, lit up. Bloomberg News alert. Dad's phone in his shirt pocket buzzed against his chest. Mom's phone, sitting on the sideboard, began to chime with a text message alert, then another, then another. It sounded like a slot machine paying out a jackpot. Even Aunt Brenda's phone, buried deep in her purse, began to muffle ring. The room erupted into a cacophony of digital noise. It was a symphony of notifications. Every news app, every social media platform, every group chat in the world was lighting up simultaneously. The name, Liana Amberton, was trending globally. The algorithm had found me. The noise was deafening. It bounced off the walls, amplifying the panic. Dad reached for his chest, looking around wildly. Mom put her hands over her ears. My phone continued its relentless, piercing alarm. It was the red line, the direct link. I sighed. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the device. It was a slate of black glass, thinner than a credit card. I placed it on the table, right next to the spreading pool of cranberry sauce. I tapped the screen once. The room's chaotic noise seemed to dampen instantly as the clarity of the speakerphone cut through the din. "Ms. Amberton." A voice barked. It was a woman's voice, sharp, professional, terrified. "This is Amberton," I said. My voice was calm, a stark contrast to the hysteria surrounding me. "This is Sarah Jenkins, White House press secretary," the voice announced. "We have a situation. CNN broke the embargo. They ran the package before we could secure the perimeter." "I know, Sarah," I said, picking up a napkin and dabbing a spot of cranberry sauce that had splashed onto my wrist. "I am watching it. Anderson Cooper looks very concerned," the family gasped. Collectively, a single, sharp intake of air. I was on a first-name basis with the White House press secretary. "Ms. Amberton, we need to know your status," Sarah continued, her voice tight. "Has your location been compromised? Are you in a secure facility?" I looked around the room. I looked at the nutcrackers on the mantel. I looked at the congealing turkey. I looked at my mother, who was staring at the phone as if it were a bomb. "I am in a suburban dining room in Illinois." "Sarah," I said dryly, "the only hostile entities here are my aunt and a very dry bird." There was a pause on the line, a confused silence. I do not understand," Sarah stammered. "You are not at the Citadel, no? It is Christmas. I am visiting my parents. Oh God, Sarah whispered. The feed. Ms. Amberton. The CNN feed just switched to a live satellite view. They are tracking the IP address of the login you used to stop the Fed attack. I frowned. I routed that through 7 proxies. They cut through them. The world is looking for you. And if they triangulate that signal, Ms. Amberton, are you near a window? I looked to my left. The large bay window of the dining room was covered by sheer curtains, but through them, I could see the streetlights. Yes, I said. Move away from the window, Sarah commanded. Now, we are scrambling a Secret Service detail from Chicago, but they are 20 minutes out. If the press finds you before we do, it is going to be a zoo. I stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the floor. Understood, I said. Amberton out. I tapped the screen, ending the call. The silence rushed back into the room, heavy and suffocating. I looked down at my family. They were all looking up at me, their necks craned. I seemed to have grown a foot taller in the last 30 seconds. The dynamic of the room had shifted tectonically. I was no longer the child at the kids' table. I was the sun, and they were just planets orbiting my gravity, terrified of being burned. Kevin pushed his chair back, the legs screeching. He stood up slowly, his legs shaking. He looked at the phone on the table. He looked at me. You, he whispered. You just hung up on the White House. I picked up my phone and slipped it back into my pocket. They talk too much, I said, and we have dessert to get to. The silence in the room was not empty. It was heavy, filled with the debris of 20 years of assumptions shattering all at once. My father was the first to try and piece the old reality back together. His hands trembling as he picked up his wineglass, realized it was empty, and set it back down. He looked at me, not with pride, but with a desperate need for coherence. He needed the world to make sense again. But you said, he stammered, his voice cracking like dry wood. Liana, you sat right there, 10 minutes ago, and you told me you were hunting. You used that word. You said you were hunting. We asked if you were job hunting, and you said yes. I did not lie. Dad, I said, leaning back in my chair. The wood of the dining chair felt hard against my spine, a stark contrast to the ergonomic Herman Miller Aeron chair in my command center. I just let you fill in the blanks with the only context you understand. I took a breath, deciding to dismantle the misunderstanding with the same precision I used to dismantle malware. I was hunting. I continued, keeping my voice level, but I was not hunting for an entry-level position in data entry. I was hunting for a zero-day exploit. Do you know what that is? Dad shook his head slowly. It is a flaw in software that is unknown to the vendor. I explained. A hole in the wall that nobody knows exists until a thief climbs through it. Last week, I found one in the guidance system of a commercial airliner fleet. If I had not found it, someone else would have. And if they had used it, planes would have fallen out of the sky. I looked at Aunt Brenda, who was staring at me as if I had grown a second head. That bug, that single line of bad code, was worth $20 million. I said, that is the bounty fee the manufacturer paid my company to patch it before it went public. So yes, Dad, I was hunting. And when I bagged the game, I used the proceeds to hire 50 more cybersecurity engineers to patrol the network. I currently employ 2,000 people. I am not looking for a job. I am the reason 2,000 families have health insurance. The room seemed to shrink. My father looked at the envelope of cash sitting next to my plate. $500. It suddenly looked like a Monopoly bill, but Mom's voice was small, wavering. You said you work from home. You said you just work from your apartment. We thought you could not afford an office. I laughed, a short, dry sound that held no humor. Mom, I do not go to an office because an office is a security liability. I said, my apartment in Chicago is not a studio. It is the top 3 floors of the St. Regis Tower. It is a penthouse, yes, but it is also a SCIF, a sensitive compartmented information facility. I saw Kevin's eyes widen. He knew what a SCIF was. The walls are lined with copper mesh to block electromagnetic signals. I went on, enjoying the look of shock on their faces. The windows are bulletproof polycarbonate. I have a server farm in the climate-controlled basement that runs on its own independent power supply. I have armed guards in the lobby who are former Mossad agents. I work from home because my home is the only place in the Midwest secure enough to house the codes I carry. I gestured to the silver briefcase at my feet. If I walked into a WeWork with this, I would be violating 5 different federal laws. So, no, Mom, I am not working from my couch in my pajamas because I am lazy. I am working from a fortress because the Chinese government would pay $1 billion to know what I am typing. Kevin made a noise. It was a strangled sort of whimper. He looked at the rental car keys sitting on the table next to the cranberry sauce stain. The car, Kevin whispered. The Ford. You are driving a beat-up Ford Taurus. I turned my gaze to him, the predator looking at the prey. It is called camouflage. Kevin, I said, do you think I drive my Aston Martin to Thanksgiving? Do you think I want to pull up to this house in a vehicle that screams kidnap me? I picked up the rental keys and dangled them in the air. My security detail. The team you saw on the news, the ones in the black SUVs, they assessed the threat level for this trip. They determined that driving a luxury vehicle through the suburbs would draw unnecessary attention. They advised me to blend in, to look unremarkable, to look like you all expect me to look. I dropped the keys back onto the table. They clattered loudly. The Ford is armor. Kevin, just like the silence was armor. Dad looked up, his eyes wet. Why didn't you tell us, he asked. Why let us think you were failing? Why let us sit here and lecture you? Because I have top secret clearance, Dad. I said, that is not just a phrase from a movie. It is a legal binding status. I cannot talk about my work. I cannot discuss my clients. I cannot tell you that I spent last Tuesday briefing the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I looked around the table, meeting each of their eyes, and honestly, it was safer this way. If people knew who I was, if they knew what I was worth, you would all be targets. By letting you think I was a failure, by letting you think I was the unemployed black sheep, I protected you. Nobody holds a gun to the head of a receptionist's brother to get nuclear launch codes. But the brother of the CEO of Aegis Prime, that is leverage. I paused, letting that sink in. You being ashamed of me was the perfect cover. I added softly, your disappointment was my shield. Mom let out a sob. It was a heartbroken sound. She covered her face with her hands. But we treated you like, she cried, like you were nothing. I know. I said, I was there. Then I turned to Kevin. My brother was still trying to process the shift in power dynamics. He was gripping the edge of the table, his knuckles white. He was trying to find a way to salvage his ego, to find some scrap of superiority he could stand on. Well, Kevin stammered, his voice weak but defiant. That is impressive. Liana, really. But let's not get carried away. You are in tech. It is a bubble. I am in finance. I deal with the real heavy hitters, my bank. We move billions. We are the backbone of the economy. I smiled. It was the smile of a shark that had just smelled blood in the water. Your bank, I repeated. You work for sovereign capital. Right? Kevin nodded, puffing out his chest slightly. Sovereign capital. We are a premier institution. I reached for my water glass. I know sovereign capital. I said casually. You guys signed a contract with Aegis Prime last week. Thursday. I believe. 11 in the morning. Kevin froze. What, your CIO? A man named Henderson called my sales team in a panic. I said, reciting the details from memory. Your firewall was outdated. You had a breach in your Singapore branch. You needed an immediate overhaul of your encryption protocols. Kevin's mouth opened, but no sound came out. We took the contract, I said, shrugging. It was a small job. $50 million for a 3-year license. We usually do not take contracts that small, but I approved it personally. You approved it? Kevin squeaked. I did. I said, because I saw your name on the employee roster. I thought, hey, that is my brother's bank. Let's help them out. I leaned forward, locking eyes with him. But here's the thing, Kevin, in our internal system, we rate our clients by tiers. Tier A is the Pentagon, the White House, the Federal Reserve. Tier B is the Fortune 100, Google, Apple, Amazon. I paused, letting the silence stretch. Sovereign capital is rated as Tier C. I said coldly, you are a low-priority client. You are the people we get to when the real work is done. So when you sit there and tell me about the real world, just remember that I own the digital ground you walk on. I could shut down your bank's email servers with a single phone call. I could lock you out of your office before dessert is served. You are not a wolf. Kevin, you are a tenant in a building that I built. Kevin looked like he had been punched in the stomach. He slumped back in his chair, the arrogance draining out of him like air from a punctured tire. The $50 million contract, a number that represented his entire bank's IT budget, was pocket change to me. A favor. A rounding error. Monica looked at her husband, then at me. Her expression was a mix of horror and calculation. She was realizing that the fixer-upper sister-in-law was actually the most powerful person she had ever met. Liana, Monica said, her voice high and breathless. We had no idea. If we had known, if you had known, what I asked, you would have been nicer. You would have respected me. I did not wait for an answer. I turned to my mother. She was still crying, but her eyes had drifted down to the table. She was staring at the white envelope, the $500. She reached out a trembling hand and touched the paper. So, she whispered, her voice thick with tears, you do not need the money. I looked at the envelope. It was pathetic, really, but it was also the only way she knew how to love. It was a transactional love, based on the idea that I was broken and she was the fixer. No, Mom, I said gently, I do not need the $200 or the $500. I made $500 in interest in the time it took us to eat this turkey. She pulled her hand back as if the envelope were hot. I felt so bad for you, she mumbled. I told everyone. I told the church group to pray for you. I told them you were lost. I am not lost. Mom, I said, I am just operating on a map you have never seen. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. Aunt Brenda. She was trying to be subtle. She was moving her hands slowly, inch by inch, toward the coffee table, where she had left the resume book. The bright yellow cover of the resume repair kit seemed to glow like a radioactive isotope in the tense room. She reached it. Her fingers curled around the spine. She tried to slide it off the table and into her lap, hoping to make it disappear into the abyss of her handbag. Leave it, Aunt Brenda, I said without looking at her. She froze. I think I will keep it, I said, turning to face her. It might be funny to frame it. I can hang it in my office next to the Medal of Freedom the president gave me last year. Brenda dropped the book. It hit the floor with a thud. The Medal of Freedom. Uncle Tom asked, his voice barely a whisper. It is classified, I said. But yes, the room fell silent again. The weight of the truth was settling on them, crushing their small, petty grievances. They were small people in a small room, and they had just realized that the giant they had been mocking had been careful not to step on them. Dad took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. He looked old, defeated. We are idiots, he said. I did not contradict him. The piece of the revelation lasted exactly 15 minutes. That was the precise amount of time it took for the first news van to crest the hill of our subdivision. I had just finished dismantling my family's entire worldview, leaving them sitting in the rubble of their own assumptions, when the living room was suddenly bathed in a wash of harsh, artificial light. It was not the warm glow of Christmas decorations. It was the aggressive blue-white strobe of high-intensity discharge lamps mounted on the roof of a broadcast truck. Then came the noise. It started as a low rumble, the sound of heavy engines idling, and quickly escalated into a cacophony of slamming doors, shouting voices, and the static crackle of police scanners. Mom looked toward the window, her eyes wide. What is that? Is that the police? It is the circus. Mom, I said, not moving from my chair. I told you. CNN broke the embargo. The location data leaked. Before anyone could react, the doorbell rang. It did not just ring, it was pressed repeatedly. A frantic, staccato demand for attention. Dad stood up, looking dazed. He smoothed his shirt, instinctively checking to make sure his tie was straight. He walked to the door like a man in a trance. "Robert, wait," Mom called out. "We are not dressed for company," but Dad was already opening the door. Standing on the porch was not a reporter, it was Mrs. Henderson from next door. Mrs. Henderson was a woman who had spent the last 10 years peering through her blinds and filing noise complaints every time I parked my rental car 2 inches over the curb. She was the neighborhood watch commander, a woman who lived to judge. Tonight, however, she was wearing a festive red sweater with a reindeer on it, and she was holding a Tupperware container of cookies. "Robert," Mrs. Henderson gasped, pushing past him into the foyer before he could even invite her in. Her eyes were darting around the room like a laser scanner. "I just saw the news." I could not believe it. "Our little Liana, the billionaire." She spotted me sitting at the dining table. A squeal erupted from her throat that sounded like a tire skidding on asphalt. "There she is, the genius Mrs." Henderson rushed over, placing the cookies on the table right next to the congealing turkey. "I brought you some of my snickerdoodles. I know they are your favorite. I always told my husband that Liana is special. She is going places." I stared at her. "Mrs. Henderson, last Christmas you told my mother I was a vagrant because I was wearing a hoodie while getting the mail." She laughed, a nervous, trilling sound. "Oh, stop it. You have such a dry sense of humor, just like Elon Musk." "Listen, honey, do you mind if we take a quick selfie? Just for the neighborhood Facebook group. They will die when they see I am right here with you." She already had her phone out, the camera app open. She leaned in close. Smelling of peppermint schnapps and opportunism, I leaned away. "Mrs. Henderson, please." But before I could eject her, the front door, which Dad had left open, became a portal to hell. A cameraman from the local Chicago affiliate stepped onto the porch, his lens zooming in past Dad's shoulder. A reporter with a microphone thrusted into the gap. "Mr. Amberton, sir, can we get a comment? How does it feel to be the father of the modern digital age? Did you know your daughter was saving the economy while you were eating dinner?" The flash of the camera strobes was blinding. Pop, pop, pop. Dad stood there, blinking. He looked at the microphone. And then, a terrifying transformation occurred. The shame he had felt 5 minutes ago vanished. The embarrassment of having an unemployed daughter evaporated. In its place, a new persona emerged. The architect's father. He puffed out his chest. He leaned into the doorway, blocking the cold wind but welcoming the attention. "Well," Dad said, his voice dropping an octave to sound more authoritative, "we always knew Liana was destined for greatness. We nurtured that curiosity. When she was a child, we encouraged her to take risks, to think outside the box." I listened from the table, my jaw tightening, encouraged me. When I was 12, he took away my computer because I was spending too much time on the internet and made me join the soccer team, where I proceeded to score 3 goals for the opposing side out of sheer spite. "We are very proud," Dad continued, beaming into the camera lens. "It takes a strong family foundation to build a billionaire. We provided that stability." "Dad," I shouted, standing up, "close the door." He did not hear me. He was intoxicated. The drug of fame had hit his bloodstream, and he was overdosing instantly. More reporters were crowding in now. I could see the logos on their jackets. Fox 32, WGN. Someone from the Chicago Tribune was taking notes on a pad. "Is she inside?" "Sir? Can we speak to Liana? Is it true she turned down a takeover offer from Google? Does she really have a bunker in the basement?" Dad laughed. A hearty, fake patriarch laugh. "No bunker. Just a good old-fashioned American basement, but she is resting right now. Big day saving the world." You know, Mom had stood up and was now hovering behind Dad, smoothing her hair. She was terrified, but she was also smiling. She waved awkwardly at a camera. Kevin, meanwhile, had slid out of his chair and was moving toward me. He did not look at the cameras. He was looking at me with a feverish intensity. He pulled up a chair and sat close. Too close. "Liana," he whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and greed. "Listen, the press is here. This is huge. The stock price of Aegis Prime, wait. You are private, right? But the valuation, it is going to skyrocket after this news." I looked at him. "What do you want?" "Kevin." "I was thinking," he said, licking his lips, "about what you said, about Sovereign Capital being a Tier C client. That is embarrassing for us. But we can fix it. I can be your point man." He reached out and touched my arm. His hand was clammy. "We can announce a strategic partnership." Kevin hissed. "Not just a vendor contract, a partnership. You and me, brother and sister, the Amberton dynasty. I can handle the financials. You do the tech stuff. I can introduce you to the board. I can get you a seat at the table with the real players in New York." I pulled my arm away as if he were radioactive. "Kevin," I said, my voice low and dangerous, "I am the table. I do not need a seat, and I definitely do not need an introduction to your board of directors. I already own 8% of your bank's voting stock through a shell company in the Caymans. If I wanted a meeting, I would call an emergency session, and you would be serving the coffee." Kevin recoiled. You own stock, I own the debt that structures your bonus. Kevin, now back off. Outside. The chaos was escalating. The reporters were no longer content with the porch. They were spilling onto the lawn. "Hey, look at this," someone shouted. A photographer had jumped the white picket fence. He was trampling directly over Mom's winter cabbage display, his heavy boots crushing the plants into the snow. He was running toward the driveway. "He wants a picture of the car, Mrs." Henderson squealed from the foyer. "He wants to see the billionaire's car." The photographer reached the beige Ford Taurus rental. He began snapping pictures of it from every angle. Flash, flash, flash. "Is this it?" a reporter yelled. "She drives a rental. It has an Enterprise sticker on the bumper." "It is eccentric," another reporter shouted. "It is a statement. The Warren Buffett of cybersecurity. She is frugal." They were swarming the car now, leaning on the hood, pressing their lenses against the glass to see if there were secrets inside. "Dad," I said again, my voice cutting through the noise like a whip. "Close. The door. Just a moment." "Sweetie," Dad called back over his shoulder. "They just want to know about your childhood." He was gone, lost to the lights. I looked out the bay window. There were at least 30 people on the lawn now. They were destroying the landscaping. They were shouting. It was a violation of my perimeter. My security detail was still 10 minutes out. I had to clear the zone. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I did not call the police. The police would take too long, and they would just give more interviews. I opened the terminal app. I typed in a command string. Access neighborhood _IoT _grid _subdivision _7 target irrigation _systems _all override winter _lockout pressure max execute. The command took less than a second to propagate through the local mesh network. The suburban irrigation systems in this neighborhood were connected to Wi-Fi for smart watering based on weather patterns. They were protected by default passwords. Admin/admin. It was pathetic. Really. I hit enter. Outside, a mechanical thunk echoed through the frozen air. Then, a hiss. And then, the deluge. Every sprinkler head on my parents' lawn and Mrs. Henderson's lawn next door popped up simultaneously. It was December in Chicago. The temperature was 22 degrees Fahrenheit. The water in the lines was near freezing. Jets of icy water blasted out of the ground with the force of fire hoses. The reaction was instant and gratifying. Cold. It is freezing my camera, my lens. The reporters screamed as they were pummeled by oscillating streams of ice water. The photographer who was leaning on my rental car took a direct hit to the face from a rotary nozzle. He slipped on the icy driveway and went down hard. Sliding into the bushes, the crowd scattered. They ran for their vans, slipping and sliding on the wet, freezing grass. The pristine, manicured lawn turned into a mud pit within seconds. Dad, who was standing in the open doorway, got clipped by a stray jet of water. It soaked his shirt and hit him square in the glasses. "Gah!" Dad shouted, jumping back and slamming the front door shut. "What the hell?" The sudden silence in the foyer was heavy. Dad stood there, dripping wet, shivering. Mrs. Henderson was clutching her cookies, looking out the peephole in horror. I slipped my phone back into my pocket. "Sprinkler malfunction," I said calmly. "These smart systems are so glitchy, you should really change the factory password." Dad wiped the water from his face. He looked at me. He looked at the closed door. He looked at the reality of the situation. The fame had been washed away by 30 gallons of municipal water. Liana stood up. I did not stand up like the daughter who had come home for Christmas. I stood up like the CEO who commanded a private army. I pushed the chair back. I placed my hands flat on the table. "Enough," I said. The single word cracked through the room. Mom stopped wiping the table. Kevin stopped trying to calculate his stock options. Mrs. Henderson stopped breathing. Dad dripped silently onto the hardwood. "Sit down, Dad," I ordered. He looked at me, surprised by the tone. It was not a request. It was a directive. I said, "Sit down." Dad walked over to the table and sat in his wet shirt. He looked small. "Mrs. Henderson," I said, turning my gaze to the neighbor. "You need to leave. Now. Use the back door. Jump the fence if you have to. But get out of my house. But the cookies." Mrs. Henderson stammered. "Take the cookies," I said. She scrambled toward the kitchen, her reindeer sweater disappearing around the corner. The back door slammed a moment later. I looked at my family, my wet father, my terrified mother, my greedy brother, my stunned sister-in-law, my horrified aunt and uncle. "You wanted a successful daughter," I said, my voice quiet but filling every corner of the room. "You wanted someone who made waves, someone who mattered. Well, you got her." I walked over to the window and closed the curtains, blocking out the view of the retreating news vans and the soaking wet lawn. "But success has a price," I continued, turning back to face them. "And the price is privacy. The price is peace. You just sold mine for 5 minutes of airtime on Channel 9. I did not mean to—" Dad started, his voice trembling. "I was just proud. You were not proud." "Dad," I cut him off. "You were validated. There is a difference. Pride is what you feel when I do something good. Validation is what you feel when you can brag to your neighbors. You were willing to let me freeze in the dark when you thought I was poor, but the second the cameras showed up, you were ready to rewrite history." I walked back to the table and picked up my silver briefcase. I clicked the biometric lock. It hissed open. The interior lit up with a soft blue glow. Screens unfolded. Data streams cascaded down the holographic display. It looked like I had opened a portal to the future in the middle of their dining room. "My security team is 5 minutes out," I said, typing a command to secure the perimeter. "We are evacuating. This house is compromised." Evacuating, Mom asked. "Where to a secure location?" I said, because thanks to that little press conference on the porch, every hacker, foreign agent, and kidnapper with a Wi-Fi connection now knows exactly where the architect is having Christmas dinner. I looked at Kevin. "And Kevin," I said. He looked up, eyes wide. "If you ever mention a partnership again, I will buy your bank, dissolve it, and turn the headquarters into a server farm for storing cat memes. Do you understand?" Kevin nodded. He understood. "Good," I said. "Now pack a bag. We are leaving in 4 minutes." The silence in the dining room, previously punctuated only by the dripping of my father's sodden shirt, was broken by a new sound. It began as a low vibration in the floorboards, a tremor that rattled the silverware against the fine china. Then it grew. It was a rhythmic, heavy thumping that beat against the chest cavity like a second heart. Mom looked at the ceiling, her eyes wide. Is that the news helicopter?" she asked, her voice trembling. I did not look up. I was busy securing the latches on my briefcase. "News helicopters buzz." "Mom," I said calmly, "they sound like angry hornets. This is not a hornet. This is a hawk." The noise intensified until it was a deafening roar directly above the house. The Christmas ornaments on the tree began to sway. The angel on top, which had been leaning to the left for 20 years, finally gave up the ghost and toppled off, shattering on the hardwood floor. Outside, the screech of tires tore through the night air. I walked to the window and peered through the slit in the curtains. 2 massive, matte black SUVs had mounted the curb. They were not rentals. They were Chevrolet Suburbans, up-armored, with run-flat tires and reinforced grills. They did not stop for the landscaping. They plowed through my mother's prize-winning hedges and slammed to a halt on the front lawn, effectively blocking the view of the street. The doors flew open in perfect synchronization. 6 figures emerged. They were not wearing police uniforms. They were not wearing suits. They were dressed in full tactical gear, black cargo pants, plate carriers, ballistic helmets, and communication headsets. And they were armed, not with pistols, but with short-barreled carbines strapped to their chests. Dad, who had been about to sit down, stood up again, his face draining of all color. "Liana," he whispered, "those men have machine guns. They are grand power Strybogs. Actually," I corrected absent-mindedly. "Or maybe HK-416s. Hard to tell from this distance. But yes, they are guns." The team moved with a fluid, terrifying efficiency. 2 of them fanned out to the perimeter, pushing the few remaining reporters back with aggressive verbal commands and the physical intimidation of a loaded weapon. The reporters did not argue. They scrambled into their vans and peeled away. The front door, which Dad had locked, burst open. It was not kicked in. It was opened with a master key that my security team had likely fabricated in the last 30 seconds. A tall man stepped into the foyer. He was built like a tank, with a scar running through his left eyebrow and eyes that scanned the room for threats before landing on me. He lowered his weapon, keeping it at the low-ready position. "Captain Miller," I said, "you made good time. Protocol Exodus is in effect." "Ma'am?" Miller said. His voice was gravel, the kind of voice that gave orders that people died obeying. "We have a hostile signature on the local network and a physical breach of the perimeter by non-combatants. We need to move, now." He stepped fully into the living room, his boots muddying the pristine carpet. He did not apologize. He looked at my family with the cold professional detachment of a zookeeper looking at the animals in an exhibit he was securing. "Ma'am, the airspace is not clear for extraction," Miller continued, tapping his earpiece. "We are going ground transport to the private airfield in Gary. The jet is fueled and spinning up." "Understood," I said. My mother let out a whimper. She was pressing herself against the sideboard, clutching a napkin to her chest. "Liana," she breathed. "Who are these people? Why do they have guns in my house? These are my employees." "Mom," I said, "this is Captain Miller. He used to lead a SEAL team. Now he leads my personal detail." Miller nodded once at my mother. A sharp, curt motion. "Ma'am, but why?" Dad stammered. He looked at the guns, then at me. "Liana, you write code. You make software. Why do you need this? This is for drug lords. This is for presidents." Miller turned to face my father. He did not smile. He did not offer reassurance. "Sir," he said, his voice flat, "your daughter is a Tier 1 national asset." "Asset," Dad repeated. Captain Miller gestured to the silver briefcase I was holding. "Do you know what is in that case?" Sir Miller asked. "A computer," Dad said weakly. Miller shook his head. "That case contains the rolling encryption keys for the AEHF satellite constellation. It is the communication backbone for the United States Nuclear Command and Control. If a hostile actor captures your daughter and forces her to decrypt that drive, they could blind the entire U.S. military in 12 seconds. The room went dead silent. The air seemed to be sucked out of the space. Nuclear Aunt Brenda whispered, She looked like she was going to faint. She grabbed Uncle Tom's arm, her fingernails digging into his suit jacket. Miller continued, ignoring her reaction. He was focused on the threat assessment. Ms. Amberton also holds the master administrative access for the power grids of the Eastern Seaboard, 3 major banking clearinghouses, and the air traffic control system for North America. He took a step closer to my father, looming over him. Sir, if your daughter is taken, the United States does not just lose money, the United States ceases to function as a sovereign nation. She is not a software developer, she is the failsafe, and right now, thanks to that stunt on the porch, her location is compromised. Dad slumped against the wall. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a horror that went beyond parental concern. He was looking at a stranger. He realized, in that moment, that the daughter he had lectured about stability carried the weight of the apocalypse in her handbag. You never said. Dad whispered. I told you I worked in security, I said softly. Mom began to cry. It was not the polite, sniffly crying of earlier. It was a deep, chest-heaving sob. She looked at the armed men, at the ballistic vests, at the way Miller stood between me and the window, using his body as a shield. My baby, she sobbed. You are in danger. Every day. You are in danger. I am not in danger. Mom, I said, walking over to her, I am the danger. That is why they pay me $4 billion. I reached out to touch her arm, but she flinched. It was a small movement, almost imperceptible, but it broke my heart more than the years of criticism ever had. She was afraid of me. She was afraid of the world I lived in. Kevin was sitting on the floor. He had collapsed there when the guns appeared. He was staring at Captain Miller's boots. Nuclear command, Kevin muttered. He sounded drunk, though he had only had 2 glasses of wine. Satellites. He looked up at me. His face was gray. I handle mergers, Kevin said. His voice was hollow. I merge mid-sized regional banks. I felt important because I got a corner office. He laughed, a sound that bordered on hysteria. You hold the keys to the satellites, he said, and I tried to get you a job doing data entry. He put his head in his hands. I offered the woman who protects the nuclear codes $15 an hour. Kevin said to the carpet, I am an ant. I am less than an ant. I am bacteria. Miller checked his watch. Ma'am, we are burning daylight, he said. The perimeter is soft. We need to go. Package is ready for transport. I nodded. I looked around the room one last time. The half-eaten turkey, the spilled cranberry sauce, the resume book lying on the floor, the shattered angel ornament. It was a tableau of a life I had outgrown a decade ago. I am ready, I said. Wait, Mom cried out, stepping forward. She wiped her eyes. Liana, you cannot just leave. It is Christmas. We have not even had dessert. I made pecan pie. I looked at my mother. She was trying to cling to the normalcy of pie in the face of paramilitary extraction. It was tragic, and it was beautiful in a way. I cannot stay for pie. Mom, I said gently, it is not safe. If I stay, the people looking for me will come here, and they will not be as polite as Captain Miller. But where will you go? Dad asked. When will we see you? I do not know. I said honestly, I will send you a secure phone. We can talk on that. Do not use your landline. Do not use your cell phones. Secure phone, Dad repeated, like spies, like people who want to stay alive. I said. I signaled to Miller. He spoke into his headset. Move out. Alpha team on point. Bravo on rear guard. We are leaving. The men moved instantly. They surrounded me, forming a diamond formation. I was the jewel in the center, protected by flesh and Kevlar. I walked toward the door. As I passed Kevin, he reached out and grabbed the hem of my jeans. Liana, he said. He looked up at me, tears streaming down his face. I am sorry. I did not know. I really did not know. I looked down at him. It does not matter. Kevin, I said, you saw what you wanted to see. I pulled my leg away and kept walking. We stepped out into the cold night air. The wind was howling now, whipping my hair across my face. The black SUVs were idling. their engines purring with menace. The snow on the lawn was churned into mud by the heavy tires. The neighborhood was silent. No reporters, no neighbors. The sight of the tactical team had sent everyone scurrying behind their blinds. Miller opened the back door of the lead SUV. The interior was leather and steel, illuminated by soft tactical red lighting. I climbed inside. The seat was heated. A screen on the back of the front seat showed a satellite feed of the area, with green dots representing my team and red dots representing potential threats. Miller climbed into the front passenger seat. "Go," he ordered the driver. The SUV surged forward. We rolled over the curb, crushing what was left of the mailbox, and roared down the street. I looked out the tinted back window. I saw my parents standing in the doorway of their big, expensive, safe suburban house. They looked tiny. They were silhouetted against the warm light of the hallway. Two small figures watching a world they did not understand speed away from them. They had wanted me to be safe. They had wanted me to be stable. They had wanted me to be like them. Instead, I had become something else entirely. I had become a power they could not comprehend, a force of nature wrapped in a cashmere sweater. I turned away from the window and looked at the screen in front of me. A notification popped up. Status Exodus initiated. Destination Citadel. Threat level high. I tapped the screen to acknowledge. I was going back to work. Captain Miller had granted me exactly 5 minutes. That was the time required for his Bravo team to sweep the rental car for any tracking devices before transferring my personal effects to the armored convoy. 5 minutes, in my world? 5 minutes was an eternity. It was enough time to crash a stock market, patch a critical vulnerability, or negotiate a hostage release. Tonight, however, it was just enough time to watch my family's entire emotional infrastructure collapse in real time. The living room was quiet, save for the rhythmic, low-level static from the security team's radios. The air smelled of wet wool and the lingering, metallic scent of the adrenaline that had spiked when the guns were drawn. My family stood amidst the ruins of their Christmas, the shattered ornaments, the cooling turkey, the muddy boot prints on the carpet looking like survivors of a natural disaster. I stood by the fireplace, my coat already buttoned, my hands deep in my pockets. I was ready to leave. I wanted to leave, but the silence was too loud. It was screaming with things unsaid, with excuses hovering on the tip of their tongues. Dad was the first to break it. He was wiping his glasses with a napkin, a nervous tick I had watched for 20 years. He put them back on, blinking at me as if trying to bring me into focus. "Liana," he began, his voice raspy, We only wanted what was best for you. You have to understand that." I looked at him. He looked smaller than I remembered. "Best for me?" I asked. "Or best for you?" "Best for you," he insisted, taking a step forward. "We were worried. A parent's job is to worry. We saw you struggling. We saw you without a path. We just wanted you to be safe, to be secure. If you had just told us, if you had just explained, we would have been proud. We would have been your biggest cheerleaders." I laughed. It was a cold sound, devoid of humor. "Would you?" I asked. "Of course," Dad said, spreading his hands. "You are our daughter. We are proud of you. Look at what you have done. It is incredible." I walked over to the dining table. The mess was still there. The wine stains, the half-eaten rolls, and there, sitting like an accusation in the center of the chaos, was the white envelope. I picked it up. It felt light. I held it up between 2 fingers. $500. I said. Dad flinched. "This is not help." "Dad," I said, "this is evaluation. This is what you decided I was worth. You looked at me, and you saw a charity case. You saw a failure. And now, suddenly, because a man on CNN read a teleprompter, you are proud. It is not about the money." Dad stammered. "It is entirely about the currency." I corrected, "But not the dollar amount. It is about the currency of faith. You are proud now because the world told you it is safe to be proud. You are proud because the president thanked me. You need external validation to believe in your own child." I tossed the envelope back onto the table. It slid across the wood and stopped next to the resume book Aunt Brenda had dropped. If I had told you the truth 3 years ago, I continued, my voice steady. If I had told you I was building a company in a basement with no revenue and no guarantee of success, would you have been proud then? Or would you have told me to stop dreaming and apply for a job at the insurance firm? Dad opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked down at his shoes. Exactly. I said, you do not respect the process. You only respect the result. And you only respect the result when it is broadcast on national television. That is not fair, Kevin interjected. My brother stepped out from the corner where he had been sulking. He had recovered some of his bravado, though his eyes kept darting nervously toward the armed guard standing by the front door. You are being too hard on them, Liana, Kevin said, adjusting his tie as if preparing for a boardroom presentation. They are old school. They do not understand tech. They do not understand startups. You cannot blame them for being confused when you show up looking like that. He gestured vaguely at my outfit. You played a trick on us, Kevin accused. You dressed down on purpose. You hid your success. You set them up to fail just so you could have this moment. It is cruel. I turned my whole body to face him. The movement was slow, deliberate. Cruel, I repeated. Kevin crossed his arms. Yes, cruel. You could have warned us. You could have driven the Aston Martin. You could have worn a Rolex. If you had signaled your status, we would have treated you accordingly. I stared at him. The sheer, naked honesty of his statement was almost breathtaking. Listen to yourself. Kevin, I said softly, if I had signaled my status, you would have treated me accordingly. Do you realize what you are admitting? I am admitting that the world has rules, Kevin snapped. People judge by appearances. That is reality. No, I said. That is your reality. You are admitting that your respect is conditional. You are admitting that you only treat people with dignity if you think they have money. You treated me like garbage because you thought I was poor. Now you want to treat me like a queen because you know I am rich. That does not make you a good brother. Kevin, it makes you a mercenary. Kevin flushed red. I am not a mercenary. I am a realist. And you are being arrogant. Just because you struck gold with some computer code does not give you the right to talk down to us. I am still your older brother. I am still a vice president. I took a step toward him. The distance between us closed, and for the first time in his life, Kevin took a step back. You are terrified of me. I said, I am not. He lied. You are. I said, I can smell it. It smells like sweat and cheap ambition. You are not respecting me right now. Kevin, you are fearing me. You are running the numbers in your head, realizing that I could buy your career and delete it. That is not love. That is self-preservation. I turned away from him, dismissing him as a threat. He was not a wolf. He was not even a sheep. He was just a weather vane, spinning whichever way the wind of power blew. I looked at Mom. She had not spoken since the security team entered. She was standing by the window, her back to the room, looking out at the darkness where the reporters had been. Her shoulders were shaking. Mom, I said. She turned around. Her face was streaked with tears, her makeup ruined. She looked exhausted, stripped of all the suburban armor she wore so tightly. I am sorry, she whispered. I know, I said. You said that already. No, she said, shaking her head. Not for the misunderstanding, not for the money. I am sorry for how it made me feel. I frowned. What do you mean? She took a deep breath, her hands twisting the fabric of her apron. When I thought you were struggling, she said, her voice trembling. When I thought you were lost. Part of me was relieved. The admission hung in the air like smoke. Dad looked up, shocked. Patricia. It is true, Mom said, her voice gaining a sudden, painful strength. I looked at you, Liana, with your messy hair and your rental car and your refusal to settle down, and I told myself it was a tragedy. But deep down, it made me feel better about my own choices. She looked at me, her eyes pleading for understanding. I did everything right, she said. I married the nice man. I bought the house. I had the children. I followed every rule society gave me. And I am. I am just here. I am just Patricia. But you broke every rule. You dropped out of school. You ran away. You did everything I was too scared to do. She let out a short, bitter laugh. If you had succeeded, if you had really succeeded, it would mean that I wasted my life. It would mean that all my safety, all my compromising, was for nothing. So I needed you to fail. I needed you to be the cautionary tale. Because if you were a failure, then I was a success. I stared at her. It was the most honest thing she had ever said to me. It cut deeper than the insults, deeper than the job advice. She had not just underestimated me, she had actively rooted against me to validate her own existence. But you didn't fail. Mom whispered, You won. You won the whole world. And I'm just an old woman in a Christmas apron standing in a house that isn't even paid off. Mom, Dad interjected, horrified. The house is paid off. She ignored him. She was looking only at me. I am jealous. Liana, she said, I am so jealous of you that I can hardly breathe. And I hate myself for it. I am your mother. I should be happy, but I just feel small. I looked at this woman who had raised me, who had packed my lunches, who had taught me to tie my shoes, and who had secretly hoped I would stumble so she could feel tall. It was tragic, and it was final. You are not small. Mom, I said quietly, you are just afraid. You chose safety. I chose risk. There is a price for both. I gestured to the armed guards, to the chaos outside, to the life of isolation and high-stakes pressure I lived. I have billions of dollars, I said, but I also have a security detail that watches me sleep. I have enemies who want to kill me. I have a life where I cannot trust anyone, not even my own family, to love me without an agenda. You have peace, Mom. Do not undervalue that. She nodded, wiping her face. But the distance between us was now a canyon. We could shout across it, but we could never cross it again. Captain Miller stepped into the room. Ma'am, he said, checking his watch. Time is up. The convoy is rolling. We need to move. I nodded. Okay. I picked up my briefcase. I checked the lock. Green light. Secure. As I turned to head for the door, Dad stepped forward. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. Liana. Wait, he said. I stopped. What is it? Dad. One picture, he asked. His voice was hopeful. Desperate. Just one. For the album. Just us and you. So we can remember you were here. I looked at the phone in his hand. I looked at the way he was already framing the shot in his mind. I looked at Aunt Brenda, who had perked up at the mention of a photo. I looked at Kevin, who was instinctively checking his hair. They wanted a trophy. They wanted proof. They wanted to post it on Facebook and say, Look, she is ours. We made her. I thought about the years of criticism. I thought about the night watchman comments. I thought about the resume book. I thought about the sheer, unadulterated loneliness of building an empire while the people who were supposed to support you treated you like a burden. I shook my head. No. Dad, I said. He froze. No, no pictures. I said, but why, he asked. It is Christmas. Because you do not get to claim this. I said. I gestured to myself, to the sweater, to the briefcase, to the invisible aura of power that now surrounded me. You do not get to claim the victory when you were not there for the fight. I said, you do not get to show me off to your friends. You do not get to use my face to make yourselves feel important. I am not your trophy. I am the daughter you were ashamed of an hour ago. You keep that memory. You keep the memory of the girl you tried to fix. I turned my back on them. I walked to the door. The cold air rushed in to meet me, clean and biting. Liana, Mom called out. I did not stop. I walked out of the house, past the ruined hedges, past the trampled lawn. The snow was falling again, covering the mud, covering the tracks, covering the mess. I had built my empire with the bricks they had thrown at me. I had built a fortress so high they could no longer see inside. And as I climbed into the armored SUV and the heavy door slammed shut, sealing me in silence, I realized that the only thing I was leaving behind was the weight of their expectations. And God, did it feel good to be light? The wind cut through the driveway like a knife, but it was not nearly as sharp as the sound of my name being screamed by the man who had spent the last decade making me feel small. Liana, wait, please. I had one foot inside the armored SUV. The warmth of the heated leather interior was calling to me, promising an escape from the toxicity of the suburbs. Captain Miller stood by the open door, his hand resting casually on his sidearm, watching the figure stumbling down the icy front steps. It was Kevin. My brother was not running with the athletic grace he liked to brag about after his weekend squash games. He was scrambling, slipping on the patches of ice I had created with the sprinkler system, flailing his arms to keep his balance. He had lost his suit jacket, his tie was undone, the perfect gelled coiffure of the Wall Street banker was windblown and frantic. "Hold," I said to Miller. Miller signaled the driver to wait. I stepped back out onto the snowy pavement, turning to face my brother. Kevin skidded to a halt, 3 feet away from me. He was panting, his breath coming in white clouds of vapor. His face was pale, his eyes wide and wet. He looked less like a vice president and more like a man who had just seen the Grim Reaper check his watch. "Liana," he gasped, clutching his chest. "You cannot leave. Not yet. I have to go." "Kevin," I said, buttoning my coat, "my timeline is strict. Unless you have a sudden interest in cryptographic algorithms, we have nothing left to say." "No, it is not that," he stammered, looking around wildly to make sure Mom and Dad were not within earshot. He lowered his voice to a desperate whisper. I need help." I raised an eyebrow. "I thought we established that I am just a hobbyist." "Kevin, what could the great vice president of sovereign capital possibly need from me? Please, do not mock me," he begged. His voice cracked. "I am in trouble. Liana, real trouble." I stared at him. I engaged the analytical part of my brain, scanning his micro-expressions. Fear, shame, desperation. This was not about money for a ski trip. This was existential. "What did you do?" I asked. Kevin swallowed hard. He took a step closer, shivering. There is an audit coming," he whispered. "Next week. The SEC. They are looking into the merger accounts from the Q3 acquisition, and I pressed, and there is a gap," he confessed, tears spilling over his eyelids. "A liquidity gap. About $4 million. I moved it. I shifted it to a holding account to inflate the quarterly earnings so I could trigger my bonus clause. I was going to move it back in January. I swear. It was just temporary. It was just a bridge." I looked at him with zero surprise. "Cooking the books," I said flatly. "That is a felony. Kevin, that is wire fraud and securities manipulation. You are looking at 10 years in federal prison." "I know," he sobbed, grabbing my sleeve. "I know, but if I go to jail, Monica will leave me. The kids. My life is over. Liana, you have to help me." He looked at the black SUVs. He looked at the aura of power surrounding me. "You have billions," he pleaded. "You could cover the gap. You could wire $4 million to the holding account tonight. Nobody would know. It would look like a late settlement. You can fix this. You can save me." I looked down at his hand gripping my cashmere coat, the hand of the big brother who used to push me into snowbanks, the hand of the man who offered me $15 an hour to do data entry because he thought I was pathetic. Now, he was begging the failure to write a check that would cost him less than his dignity. I gently peeled his fingers off my sleeve. "No, Kevin," I said. His face crumbled. "Liana, please, we are family." I stepped back. Creating distance. "We are family." I agreed, "which is the only reason I'm not letting you go to prison." Hope flared in his eyes. "So, you will pay it." I reached into my pocket, but I did not pull out a checkbook. I did not pull out a phone to authorize a wire transfer. I pulled out a small, heavy cardstock business card. It was matte black with silver lettering. I held it out to him. Kevin took it with trembling fingers. He looked at the name. Arthur Sterling. Legal counsel. Who is this? Kevin asked. Confused. That is the head of my personal legal retention team. I said, he is the man I call when foreign governments try to seize my assets or when senators try to subpoena my code. He is a shark. Kevin, he eats prosecutors for breakfast. I do not understand. Kevin said, you are going to call him. I instructed, right now, you are going to tell him everything you just told me. He will take your case. He will negotiate a plea deal with the SEC. You will not go to prison. He will make sure you get probation and a fine. Kevin looked at the card, then at me. But the money, he asked. The $4 million, I am not paying the $4 million, I said coldly. And I am not covering up your crime. But then, I will lose my job. Kevin whispered, if I plead guilty, I will be barred from the industry. I will lose my license. I will be fired. Yes, I said. You will. I leaned in close, letting him see the absolute resolve in my eyes. You committed fraud. Kevin, because you were greedy. Because you wanted a bigger bonus to buy a faster Porsche and impress people you do not even like. You thought you were smarter than the system. You thought you could cheat. I paused. I knew about the gap 3 months ago. I revealed. Kevin froze. You knew Aegis Prime monitors financial anomalies in real time across all client networks. I explained. When you moved that money, a red flag popped up on my dashboard. I saw it. I saw you do it. Then why? Why didn't you stop me, he asked. Horrified. Because I wanted to see if you would fix it. I said, I waited. I watched. I gave you 90 days to grow a conscience. You didn't. You only came to me now because you got caught. I pointed to the card in his hand. Mister, Sterling will keep you out of a cage because you are my brother. And I do not want my nieces and nephews visiting their father in a jumpsuit. But you are going to lose your job. You are going to lose your status. You are going to learn what it feels like to actually start over from nothing. That is the lesson. Kevin, that is the help I am giving you. He stared at me. The realization sinking in. I was saving his life, but I was killing his ego. I was stripping him of the one thing he valued more than integrity, his title. But how will I live? He whispered. What will I do? Maybe you can find a job in data entry, I suggested. I hear it pays $15 an hour. Kevin flinched as if I had slapped him. He looked down at the card, clutching it like a lifeline that was also a noose. He nodded slowly. Defeated. Thank you, he choked out. Make the call. Kevin, I said. Tonight? I turned away from him. I signaled Miller again. We are leaving, I said. But first? I walked over to the other side of the driveway, where Miller was standing. I lowered my voice. Captain, I said, I want a level 1 security retrofit on the house. Cameras, reinforced doors, panic buttons, discreet installation. Bill it to the holding company. Copy that, Miller said. What about the threat level? The media will be back, I said, and the crazies will follow. I want 24-hour monitoring on my parents for the next 6 months. If anyone steps on this lawn who is not a mailman, I want to know about it. Understood. Ma'am. I walked back toward the SUV, but stopped one last time. My father had stepped out onto the porch. He was shivering in his wet shirt. Holding the door frame, he looked lost. He was watching Kevin sob in the driveway, watching the black trucks, watching his world spin out of orbit. Dad. I called out. He looked up, startled. Liana. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the keys to the rental car, the beige Ford Taurus that sat muddy and ignored in the driveway. I tossed the keys to him. It was a long throw, but Dad caught them instinctively. I need a favor, I shouted over the wind. You have to return the rental for me. The agency is at the airport. Dad looked at the keys. You want me to return the car? Yes, I said. But Dad, check the trunk first. The trunk, he asked. "There is a box in there," I shouted. "It is the real Christmas present. For you and Mom." I did not wait for him to ask what it was. I did not want to see him open it. I wanted to be miles away when the final wall of their denial came crashing down. I climbed into the SUV. Miller slammed the heavy door shut, sealing out the cold and the sobbing brother and the confused father. "Go," Miller said into his headset. The convoy moved, the heavy engines roared, and we peeled out of the driveway, leaving the subdivision behind. Inside the SUV, the silence was absolute. I leaned back in the seat, closing my eyes for a second. "Ma'am," the driver said, "I have the perimeter feed on screen 3. I opened my eyes. On the screen embedded in the seatback, I could see the live feed from the rear camera of the second SUV, and also the feed I had hacked from the neighbor's doorbell camera. I watched as Dad walked slowly down the driveway, clutching the rental keys. He walked past Kevin, who was still staring at the business card I had given him. Dad walked to the Ford Taurus. He fumbled with the keys. He popped the trunk. The lid swung open. Inside, sitting on the gray carpet, was a simple white banker's box. It was not wrapped. It did not have a bow. I watched on the screen as Dad reached in and pulled out the box. He opened the lid. He pulled out a stack of documents. Even on the grainy video feed, I knew exactly what they were. I had signed them 2 years ago. The first document was a deed of trust release. It was the official bank notification that the mortgage on 412 Maple Drive, the house my parents had been paying off for 30 years, the house they constantly worried about losing if the economy turned, had been paid in full. I watched Dad stare at the paper. I saw him walk under the porch light to read it. I saw Mom come out of the house, wrapped in a blanket. She looked over his shoulder. I saw her knees buckle. Dad had to catch her. They were reading the date. They were realizing that for the last 24 months, every mortgage payment they thought they were making had actually been routed into a high-yield savings account in their names. They were realizing that the unemployed daughter had bought their debt, paid it off in a single lump sum, and freed them from their biggest financial burden without ever taking credit. And then, Dad pulled out the second folder, the Education Trust, full-ride scholarship endowments for Kevin's 2 children. Tuition, room, board, and a stipend, fully funded for any university in the world, a gift worth $500,000, set up in an irrevocable trust. I saw Kevin look up. He saw the papers. He walked over. I saw him read the document that secured his children's future, the document signed by the sister he had just tried to swindle. I saw him drop to his knees in the snow. I saw Mom bury her face in Dad's chest. I saw Dad look up at the street, staring into the darkness where my car had just vanished. He was holding the deed in the air, his mouth open in a silent scream of gratitude and regret. They finally understood. They realized that while they were handing me $20 for gas and lecturing me about stability, I had been the invisible pillar holding up their entire world. I had been the safety net they didn't know existed. The feed started to glitch as we drove out of range. The image of my family huddled together in the snow, clutching the evidence of my love and their ignorance, froze, then dissolved into static. "Cut the feed," I said softly. The screen went black. I turned my head and looked out the window at the passing highway lights. They blurred into streaks of gold and red. "Are you okay?" Ma'am Miller asked from the front seat. I took a deep breath. For the first time in 3 years, I did not feel the crushing weight of a secret. I did not feel the need to hide. "I am fine, Miller," I said. "Best Christmas ever." "Driver," I added, "get us to the Citadel. I have a country to run." The heavy door of the Chevrolet Suburban slammed shut, sealing me inside with a dull, pressurized thud that sounded like the closing of a bank vault. The sudden silence was absolute. The heated leather seat wrapped around me, and the smell of conditioned air and gun oil replaced the scent of wet pine needles and suburban disappointment. I sat there for a moment, just breathing. Outside the thick, ballistic glass window, the world had turned into a strobe light show. The reporters who had been pushed back to the perimeter by my team were still there, desperate for one last glimpse. Their camera flashes erupted in rapid bursts, popping against the dark tint of the windows like fireworks. It was a red carpet of my own making, a chaotic, flashing tunnel of light that signaled my transition back to the world where I belonged. I turned my head to look back, through the rear window, past the silhouette of the rear guard vehicle. I could see the house. It was bathed in the harsh white floodlights of the security team. Standing on the porch, huddled together against the biting wind, were my parents, Kevin and Monica. From this distance, they looked incredibly small. For 28 years, they had been the giants of my world. They had been the arbiters of truth, the judges of success, the people whose approval I had subconsciously craved even while I was building a billion-dollar empire. They had loomed over me with their expectations and their critiques, but now, shrinking in the rearview mirror as the convoy accelerated. They looked fragile. They looked like what they were, two elderly people and a scared middle-aged man, standing in the cold, clutching a plastic box of mortgage papers, watching a force of nature leave them behind. The image of power that the Amberton family had projected the successful dentist, the wise father. The perfect mother had collapsed. It had not been destroyed by malice. It had been destroyed by the simple, blinding light of a truth that was too big for their living room to contain. I did not feel happy. I did not feel the sweet, sharp taste of revenge that I had sometimes imagined during long nights coding in the dark. I felt a heavy, quiet sense of liberation. It was the feeling of setting down a backpack filled with rocks that you had been carrying for so long you had forgotten you were wearing it. I turned forward, facing the road ahead. "Ma'am," Captain Miller said from the front seat, "we are clear of the residential zone. ETA to the airfield is 18 minutes. Understood," I said. A secure tone chimed through the vehicle's communication system. It was a specific frequency, a digital warble that bypassed the standard cellular networks. "Ma'am," Miller said, his voice tightening slightly. "Priority 1 call coming in. It is the switchboard. Put it through," I said. I pressed the button on the console next to me. "Ms. Amberton," a voice said. It was deep, rasping, and unmistakable. It was the voice that gave the State of the Union address. "Mr. President," I said, "I assumed you were enjoying your Christmas dinner." "I was," the president said, "until the NSA woke me up to tell me that the entire SWIFT banking network was almost liquidated. And then I turn on the television and see you standing on a porch in Illinois getting yelled at by a local news crew. I apologize for the optics." "Sir," I said, "my family can be enthusiastic. We need to talk about the breach." "Liana," the president said, his tone shifting to business. "The CIA is saying this wasn't just a probe, it was a prelude. The code you stopped. It had a signature we haven't seen before. They are calling it a sleeping dragon." "I know," I said. I analyzed the packet data while I was eating my turkey. "It is a polymorphic worm. It adapts to the firewall it encounters." "Can you stop it if they launch a second wave?" the president asked. The convoy merged onto the highway, the acceleration pressing me back into the seat. I looked at the dark landscape rushing by. "I am not going to stop it." "Sir," I said, "I am going to kill it. I am heading to the Citadel now. Once I am plugged into the mainframe, I am going to trace that worm back to the source server in St. Petersburg or Shanghai or wherever it is hiding, and I am going to burn it down. Do what you have to do," the president said. "The resources of the United States Cyber Command are at your disposal. I do not need Cyber Command." "Mr. President," I said, "I have Aegis Prime. Good hunting." "Liana." The line clicked dead. I sat in the quiet of the car, the president's words echoing in my mind. Good hunting. It was ironic. 3 hours ago, my father had lectured me about hunting for a job. He had tried to shame me for using a word that defined my existence. He thought hunting meant desperation. He did not understand that for me. Hunting meant dominance. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my personal phone. It was the last time I would use this device before swapping it for a secure, encrypted hardline at the bunker. I opened the family group chat. The last message was from Mom, sent 4 hours ago. Please don't be late, and try to dress nicely. I looked at those words. They seemed like they had been written in a different century. I typed a new message. My thumbs moved quickly over the glass. I am still your daughter. But from now on, read the news to know what I'm doing. Merry Christmas. I hit send. I watched the status change to delivered. Then read. I did not wait for a reply. I powered the phone down, pulled out the SIM card, and snapped it in half. I dropped the pieces into the waste disposal slot in the door panel. That life was over. The life of explaining myself, of apologizing for my existence, of shrinking to fit into a box labeled unemployed, was finished. Ma'am, we are approaching the tarmac, Miller announced. The Gulfstream is spun up and ready for immediate departure. I looked out the window. We were speeding across the tarmac of the private airfield. The massive jet stood waiting, its engines whining with power, the navigation lights blinking against the dark sky. It looked like a predator waiting to leap. The SUV screeched to a halt at the bottom of the air stairs. Miller jumped out and opened my door. The cold wind hit me again. But this time, it felt invigorating. It felt like fuel. I stepped out onto the tarmac. I gripped the handle of my silver briefcase. I walked up the stairs, my heels clicking on the metal. I did not look back at the city skyline. I did not look back at the suburbs. I entered the cabin of the jet. It was a flying command post, lined with screens and server racks. My team was already there, 3 of my best analysts, typing furiously at their stations. Status, I asked, dropping into the captain's chair at the head of the conference table. We have a lock on the origin signal, one of the analysts said. Not looking up, it is definitely the Obsidian Collective. They are regrouping for a second strike. They think you are distracted. They think you are busy dealing with the press. They are wrong. I said. I placed the silver briefcase on the table. I placed my thumb on the scanner. Identity confirmed. Welcome. Architect. The case hissed open. I lifted the lid. The screen flared to life, casting a cool electric blue light across my face. I typed in my master password. It was 40 characters long, a string of chaos that unlocked the order of the world. The screen filled with data. I saw the power grids. I saw the banking flows. I saw the air traffic corridors. I saw the pulse of the planet, visualized in streams of light, and I saw the darkness trying to creep in at the edges. I brought up the command console, target locked. I said to the room, initiating countermeasures. The analyst replied. I looked at the code. It was beautiful. It was dangerous. It was mine. My mother had wanted me to be a nurse. She wanted me to save lives one at a time. She did not understand that I saved millions of lives every time I pressed the enter key. My father had wanted me to have a stable job. He wanted me to have a pension and a plaque on the wall. He did not understand that I did not want a seat at the table. I wanted to build the house the table sat in. I hovered my finger over the execute button. Kevin had asked how he would live without his job. He was terrified of the unknown, but I lived in the unknown. I thrived in the void between the zeros and the ones. I smiled. It was the first genuine smile I had worn all night. Let's remind them who owns the dark, I whispered. I pressed the key. On the screen, a wave of blue code surged forward, consuming the red warning indicators. Somewhere in a server room in Eastern Europe, hard drives were melting. Somewhere, hackers were staring at blank screens, realizing they had picked a fight with a god. The jet engines roared to full power. The plane began to taxi, picking up speed, faster and faster, until the wheels left the ground. We climbed into the night sky, leaving the earth below. They wanted me to have a stable job. I showed them I am the stability of this entire world. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Please comment below and let me know where you are tuning in from. I would love to hear your thoughts and connect with you all. If you enjoyed this journey, please subscribe to the Healing Drama Stories channel, like the video, and hit the hype button to help this story reach even more people. Your support means the world to us.